Arts Council for providing us to put up this historical show for modern art of Pakistan, which really covers the art produced between 1950s to 60. And the panel we have, I want to introduce first my panel members, and then we'll proceed to our discussion. It would more be like a question answer, and we would like your participation in this, and it would be much appreciated to get feedback also on the exhibition that you have seen. So sitting next to me is Professor Jacques Attali, who's the former principal for National College of Arts, writer, curator, art educator for many, many years. So I welcome you to the panel. Quddus Mirza, also an art educator, teaching at NCA for many years, art critic, writer, artist, of course. Mrs. Hashmi, I just feel like Chirag ko roshni dikhana if I introduce her. So welcome to the panel today here. And what I want to begin with is I wanted to introduce Lahore Art Circle for a little bit, but then also wanted to set up premises of this panel discussion, which I think is important for this discourse, that we look at modern art of Pakistan as, like, in the context of Western modernism. And to place that in context, I'm using Partha Mitra, the art historian, what he suggests in his essay, Decentering Modernism, Art History and Avant-Garde Art from Periphery. He questions crediting the Western canon as the root of all modern artworks. He also calls into question the purity and worldwide prevalence of Western canon of modernism, which exclude the art produced in other parts of the world, considering that as derivative, unoriginal. In the context of such conversation or this essay, we begin our conversation, and as you have read the context for the Lahore Art Circle, we have usually seen and read more about the literary art circle of Lahore, which constitute like Faiz Ahmed Faiz, where we're sitting in the Faiz Festival, Saadat Hasan Manto, Sibte Hassan, and many more writers like that. But somehow it just feels like the visual arts of Pakistan has lived in this anonymity, and there was like no art production. Although we are very familiar with some of the names like Abdurrahman Chughtai, Anna Molka, Zubaida Agha. However, it just seems like there wasn't any modern art that was, on equal footing with Western modernism. And that is the premises for this exhibition as well as this conversation today. So 1952 is the year when Jacques Attali returns from Europe after completing his education, the first artist formally trained. Of course, we know that Chughtai had gone and done workshops in England before partition, but Jacques Attali gets the credit of being the first artist who was formally trained in West, and we have to remember that he's already well versed in Bengal School of Art. So somebody who comes with a vision of the Eastern education as well as the Western education, he brings a significant change in the art scene of Pakistan. So I'm just kind of reiterating and reminding you that we have parallel streams working in which Abdurrahman Chughtai is also producing modern art, in which he's taking the urban life of Pakistan after partition and painting. If you remember, people who are familiar with the artworks of Chughtai, something like College Girls, which is like, set up in this, I should have some slides, but maybe if you can rely on my words, where like two girls are standing with short haircut, and it's a very beautiful dandy girl standing in that context. So what I'm trying to say is that, we already have number of modernism prevailing at that time. So what was so different about Lahore Art Circle was that, although its antecedents are in the Western art movements, but they derive a very original style of their own, which is grounded in the Eastern tradition. So this is where I'm going to take the conversation to Mrs. Jacques Attali, and I would ask her my first question, like, what do you think is the perception of modern art of Pakistan?
Well, if we are looking at in the context of our own times, then of course the modern art of Pakistan is supposed to be, in the perception of people, something that is new. But the whole question is, what is that newness? If we look at it in the context of what has happened historically, say since since post-partition. Then of course we are creating two kinds of distinctions. The contemporary art of today and the modern art that preceded it. And are there boundaries that converge, or is it, are there, what is the kind of thinking that underlies what the modern artists were doing and what the contemporary artists are doing? Now, I think that, in my opinion, one flows into the other in a sense quite seamlessly, because there is an urge for newness, for difference, for change. And I think that was what was happening also in the West, breaking the canons, breaking traditional modes of looking and seeing and making and so on. And that is what really, in one way or another, has continued to date. We're talking about the here and now. The modern artists of the era that you're referring to were also talking about the here and now of their times. And I think that is what needs to be looked at. When you refer to Pathamithar, and what Pathamithar is suggesting is something different. So Pathamithar is talking about the way that art history is being written. And the problem that Pathamithar has is that many modernisms that occurred all over the world. In fact, he has talked about Japanese modernism and Mexican modernism. And what he said is that this was an international movement which was across the world in a sense. And each culture, society, area, country, they were trying to grapple with what was traditional and from the past, and what was the here and now of the time that the so-called modern movement takes its root in their cultures.
But I'm going to Mrs. Hashmi. Mr. Hashmi, I wanted to ask you, there was this very close relationship between Faiz Ahmed Faiz, the literary circle, these meetings at Park Tea House and Coffee House. What do you think of this relationship or the impact of the literary circle on the Lahore Art Circle, on the visual artist?
First, I'd just like to, before I come to this, I'd just like to mention a little bit about what you said in the beginning. I think it touches what Quddus has also said. We are very dependent on who writes art history. I mean, it was really the whole feminist movement which opened up this big can of worms. Who gives us our information? Who writes our art history? And yes, of course, we have had this notion which has come to us, okay, Chughtai was the artist, 1947, and Amolka had started the department in Punjab University. And, there was Zubaida Agha somewhere hovering as, a new age artist. But really, there was no way of us reading or what was being done, because there was no documentation. And as you mentioned today also, we are looking at the art history of Pakistan with a few names, and we are not really filling in the milieu. What was actually going on, who was talking to whom, who was fighting with whom. I think we need to remember that 47 was this huge upheaval. It totally shattered the works, the stable society, and it certainly shattered the cultural patterns. So you needed, and this, was said to me once by Intizar Hussain when I was interviewing him about Shakir. He said, people who came from elsewhere and planted themselves in what was alien part, and then the people here also who left, and there were big vacuums and big gaps. They felt that the old literature, the old art, perhaps was not relevant to what they had witnessed. This was a society in turmoil, of breakups, complete shattering of homes, neighborhoods, everything. And therefore, somehow they felt that there was a need. But you see, you mentioned Chughta's modern
Yeah.
work,
Yeah.
which was two college girls wearing dark spectacles. Where does Chughtai speak of what happened to the city of Lahore? He was a citizen of Lahore. So, you know, there was that very gentle, very lyrical mood of Chughtai, which continued. But then the others, you know, okay, Faiz wrote one poem, Ye Daag Daag Ujala, Ye Shab Guzida Sahar, you know. And he was almost lynched for that poem. You know, people were out to kill him for that poem. So what was going to take its place? Well, of course it was going to be new literature. There was going to be Nasir Kazmi. And then there was Shakir Ali. And Shakir and the people who would sit in the coffee, houses, they kept talking about the need for something new, as we said. And it had to reflect the breakup of what they recognized. Therefore, I think there's two aspects to it. Something that was not readable because life around was very difficult to read. So perhaps there was this moment in which what Shakir had brought, from his encounter with Cubism, in a strange way, reflected what was, a very difficult time in this society. So this encounter with Faiz, who was tremendously supportive of what they were trying to do, because even I remember once my mother came back from one of Shakir's shows and she told my father, I don't think very much of it, Perhaps later he tried to make it up to her by giving her that painting which is on view over here for her birthday. But my father said, in his usual sort of manner, he said, no, they're trying to do something new. I remember that. No, they're trying to do something new. So he was tremendously supportive of their struggles. And it was not easy because there was no vocabulary and they were inventing it. Yes, they were looking at what was happening in the West because it was being thrust down their throat through the US Information Service, which was planted, this very nice library and place which was in Bank Square. When it was very hot, it was the only air-conditioned library. We all went there. We all went there and we looked at the magazines and we were very impressed and we were, wanting to know more. So were they. But I think that, yes, there was a desire to make use of what they knew with what was looming up in their horizon. I want to mention the two women that are in this exhibition. Of course, Quddus, will you excuse me for that?
Mariam Habib.
Excuse me, Mariam Shah, she was
Mariam Shah, yeah.
Mr. Habib came later and he's in one of the photographs there. I won't mention here because I think family is here, but she was such a toast of the town. And every painter was in love with her. But of course, Mr. Hassan Habib was more charming and he, took her away. But I think there was a keenness that women should be part of the group, and therefore Razia Feroz, who's quite a tomboy, and Mariam Auntie, as she was known to me, were very much part of the discussions. And I think there was a keenness that there should be, this sort of this feeling that there was a need for a woman artist or women artists to be participants in the discussions, and they were.
I wanted to ask you, Quddus Saab, jaise we were talking about, the public didn't respond. So yes, we do have documentation of Zubaida Agha's 1949 exhibition, which sort of met very harsh reviews. Logon ne bahut kuch kaha ki ye kya cheezein produce ki. And speaking of that, I must also remind people that Shakir Ali and Shamsa are people who are already trained in Bengal School of Art, and their earlier work is all following that rhetoric. But then they choose to really deviate. Of course, Shakir Ali is educated in the West. So the question, what I wanted to ask you is yes, we understand that public didn't respond, but do you think it's important now to look back and connect and, dig out those जिन्हें कहा जाता है गड़े मुर्दे उखाड़ने की क्या ज़रूरत है हमें अभी? Do you think we need to redefine our modernism?
I think as far as public is concerned, this I remember like watching an interview of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and he said that like his novels are translated in almost like let's say 50 languages of the world and being reprinted. And he was talking, he says that I know that I am the most well read person, but a soap opera in Colombia is watched by people more than ever they read my books. So he wanted to write something about he wanted to write a soap opera basically in Spanish, which could be watched all through Latin America. So I think the public does not really determine the work of an art, because there can be various publics. Today we are also part of that public, which I think this is an amazing show which you have curated with this festival. I think in order to look back into what was our past, and is it really past, or is it part of a present, or is it part of the future? So sometimes I think our opinion or our approach toward past is that a kind of a romanticism that my father was great because he was my father. He might be a loser, but my father was great, he was a father, like my father. So I think when we see this work today, actually tells about what happened in 60s, but it also tells what happened today, what is happening today as well. So I feel strangely with all that media and every exposure and people writing on art here and there extensively, still I feel the public probably was much more aware of what was going on during Lahore Art Circle, though I was thinking that why it's called circle, why not movement? Circle is something more like you kind of enclose something, you don't really want to kind of invite, whereas progressive art movement was more about it's moving ahead. But despite the fact that Intizar Hussain wrote about them, Hassan Askari wrote about them in Urdu, in magazines or in newspaper, which were widely read and widely published. And I think Sibte Hassan also wrote, and Faiz, naturally. Safdar Mir wrote about all these artists. But whereas when we see today, the art has become more devoid from that wider public narrative or wider public language, because majority of artworks which are being discussed today in terms of a review of an exhibition or any other form, it's all in published. They're all published in English in magazines or in newspaper, which are very limited audience readership, and within that we don't really know that who reads them, or who reads them, how can they identify with those whatever is being discussed in it. So I feel that probably because these artists were also connected with writers. When we talk about them through the words of Intizar Hussain ने बहुत अच्छी बात कही थी NC में जब वो आए थे convocation में last year. He said अनवर जलाल शमजा के बारे में पता नहीं चलता था कि वो पेंटर है या राइटर है. एक पाँव उसका वहाँ पर होता था, एक पाँव कहीं और होता था. And I think that's a kind of a great compliment you can give to that movement, that it was because language is what we communicate, what we connect with other people as well. When you speak Urdu, it means like everyone can understand, and at least you break the first barrier of I don't know, class or conditioning or whatever it is, but you can speak to someone, and whether the person could not really comprehend, like गालिब पे शेरों को आप नहीं straight forwardly जान सकते, लेकिन सुन तो सकते हैं ना, समझ तो सकते हैं, कुछ deeper level पे ना जान सकें. So I feel that these artists were Ahmed Parvez, Anwar Jalal Chamza, Rahil Akbar Javed, and Hanif Rame, as you mentioned. They were really trying to kind of not to talk to public, but engage with their work, and simultaneously they were like expressing in another way using the same kind of language. The problem arises when we try to talk to public. We don't really need to talk to public.
I just want to add, this is a very small scale exhibition that we have put together, but if you see this in a larger, perspective, they were constantly having a dialogue between each other, even painting certain themes that they would have very different approach to each one of them, but it also shows their constant struggle, that how they were going in between, the dialogue of if they are doing the still life and the figurative and the naturalistic and the realistic and the abstraction. So it was just this constant, development of this dialogue. And then, coming back to the circle, I wanted to point out, certain members of the circle, like Mariam Shah, I really want to point out, she was writing prolifically at that time. So that was another way of supporting her, although her and Razia Feroz's work, sort of, if you look at it, it stands out quite differently from the rest of the group. But I think there were ways that they were supporting each other, having that dialogue of, developing this, art form. So I would now open it up to our audience. If you guys have any questions,
We've been talking mostly about how this work was received in Pakistan. I would like to know how it was received abroad.
No, I'm sure you've done a lot of research. Because I really have to congratulate Samina for this immensely important research that she has done, which I think is making us look at these people again. And also, I hope, the people who've lent this work, apart from the work that belongs to the permanent gallery, art gallery, I really want to pay tribute, because our public institutions are not known for looking after art. So I really want to thank people who've lent the work, because I can understand their reluctance. And only we know how scared we have been, how careful we have been, how, every moment until now the work goes back to the owners, we worry about it. But I just like to say that, because I'm sure you've researched, Samina, much more than me, I went as a student in 1962 to London. And Ahmed Parvez was already there, and he'd had a very successful exhibition, extremely successful. They had very hard lives to begin with. Everybody did dishwashing, everybody did cleaning. It was bad times for them. But I think that their self-belief was tremendously strong. And while somebody like Ali Imam came back and then, did his own, made his own contribution in Karachi and so on, they did go really to learn and to test themselves. And one heard about their encounters secondhand, because they would spin stories and then we would hear something, and a lot had to do with the friends that they made, people who wrote about them. But certainly it was important for them to be elsewhere and to look back. I think that was important for them, for their own growth and their experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would like to add that the fact that we are talking about them over here, and they are not really been talked anywhere else in the West, that how they were received. They are important for us now, and probably they are not really been written about it. When I went to England in 1989, and I remember going to an exhibition at Hayward, it was called The Other Story, curated by Rashida Rai. And I was very thrilled to go and see works by Shamsa, Ahmed Parvez, I don't know, Moin Hashmi, I can't recall, but mainly these two artists. And it was an appalling show. And it had such a bad review because the whole show was based or not curated, but based on this assumption that these artists who studied in England and their works were connected to one major European or mainstream artist like Alan Davey or Paul Klee. So the whole show was based on this kind of derivativeness. And I think that was, I'm talking about the 90s, there's a mainstream and there's a periphery. But now I think the work of art cannot really be seen in the same light over the years. So now today, when the whole idea of mainstream and the periphery has also changed due to economic factors, due to like when we have Louvre in UAE, or when we have Guggenheim in UAE or in Qatar or all these places, it means like there's no one mainstream. There are like mainstream can split or trickle down to various places as well. So no wonder today we have Anwar Jalal Shamsa's exhibition in England, and he's been shown, and like Zahur Akhlaq and other people as well. So they've been shown at these, again, like mainstream art fairs, Dubai Art Fair, or Art Basel, or like in London also. So I think it's not really important that how they would be, how they were treated in their own life or past. I think it's more important how they'll be seen today. Because artists, they keep on changing. Artists die, but their works are alive. And they keep on growing and they keep on changing.
So I'm just going to add on to all of this, and I had one personal experience of like, having an encounter with a Western art critic. But first of all, I just want to tell you, so the first thing is the first 10 years of the art that was produced in Pakistan, it wasn't very much like, shown abroad. I think the earliest one was Sao Paulo in 1958, where Shakir had sent work, and we don't have any evidence of how it was received. But yes, we do have evidence of Ali Imam's exhibition in early 1960s, where people have taken it very, warmly in the West. But I do want to point out, Shamsa ki ek exhibition hui, aur uspe jo Western art critic tha, I'm skipping his name, but I can tell you later. He actually wrote an essay for the introductory publication for the catalog, and he writes ke jab se Shamsa West mein aaya and he had the exposure, his painting has improved a lot. His earlier work was like, very derivative when he was working in Pakistan. So that is one evidence, and that's why I started out this whole conversation with Partha Mitra's, decentralizing modernism. That's one thing. The other thing I just wanted to tell you is like, this was my experience, like, year and a half ago, I presented a paper in National Gallery, Washington, DC, which is a very prestigious venue, and there was this wonderful art critic, Terry Smith, who has written a lot on modernism and, art from peripheries. I don't want to use the word periphery, but I'm just sort of like referring like not the mainstream Western art, but sort of like everything else around it. And he asked me, he heard the paper, he didn't say much, then he came to me in the lunch break and he said, look, I just wanted to point out, I appreciate that you are presenting your artists, and I was presenting one, Sheikh Safdar, in that paper, and he said, I just feel like you're overdoing it. And I just had to stop for a second. And I just said, look, this is exactly what I'm trying to do, is there's this art history, there's this missing link, and I'm trying to connect and weave that narrative that is not in the discourse. So I think it's again that idea of like, how Quddus Sahab was pointing out, also looking at like, modernism, because पाकिस्तान के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में कभी भी हम कोई भी मॉडर्निज़म के हवाले से भी जब मैं सवाल कर रही थी और बहुत सारी मूवमेंट्स गिनवा रही थी, कोई एक ट्रजेक्ट्री नहीं है क्रोनोलॉजिकली जो हम उसको फॉलो करें और कहें कि जैसे वेस्ट में हम कहते हैं कि जी क्यूबिज़म आया तो फिर फ़लान आया फिर फ़लान आया. We have been like put in situation, and as a post-colonial society we have dealt with many things at the same time. So simultaneously we had many movement that were kind of inspiration. So we don't have any single trajectory to follow. So we have like these elements coming from all different, but it would be very interesting if we just like develop scholarship and see how it's looked at in the West again.
My question is essentially for you, but all of you as well. And this that you're saying that Cubism, in fact, when we look at art history, the way we understand that narrative is a step by step, but wo bhi simultaneously hi ho raha tha. And I'm feeling like, and I'm asking this question out of selfish interest because I'm putting together an archive on performance art, and I'm dealing with this problem of categorizing and classification and whatnot. And it's very interesting when we speak about modernism, the moment we call it modernism, it becomes about what is it? Is it a certain kind of work? Is it a certain kind of style of painting that we're calling modernism? Because like you said, all of it is happening simultaneously. And then if we call it something else, like with my performance art research, I for a moment thought, what if I call it something else and not performance art? तो मैं अपने आप को तो 2 मिनट के लिए अपने conscience को तो clear कर लूँगी, but the reality of the fact is that the fellowship that I'm working towards is for putting an archive together on performance art. And your PhD or other PhDs and researches that we do are for Western institutions, essentially. And we fit our research or our books into those categories. So I would really like to know how you are dealing with this problem, especially because modernism, when we speak about modernism, is slightly more problematic than when we speak about performance art.
So there are a few answers for that. So first of all, I just want to make this correction, like, when we do the PhDs in the Foreign Institute, it's not necessarily fitting their criteria. I mean, it just gives us those tools to be able to, like, do our research in certain ways. But I think it would have been much easier for me, like, for instance, I was asked, like, why don't you work on, like, Zarina Hashmi? She's, in New York, and, it's much easier. She's from, Indian subcontinent. But, I chose to do what I thought is missing, and that's the lacuna, in the art history. To answer your question, so first of all, as an art historian, like, when you say these divisions are like problematic, yes, that's acknowledged fact. But, when we are teaching in academia, we have to sort of like lay out our outline that, there is a certain kind of like outline that we need to give it to students so they have a better understanding of understanding it. Coming to the question, like, what you're saying is like modernism. So basically, when I worked on my PhD, I really redefined modernism in the context of Pakistan. So I think you have to establish and reinvent, looking at the social political circumstances, how you would define certain, terminology in that context. That's what I suggest. This is how I have looked at. Because I just couldn't fit the modernism that was in the Western, perspective, looked at cubism and so, because Pakistan mein to ye sari cheezein ho rahi thi. And even if you go back before partition, you look at Amrita Shergill's work, you look at Bengal School of Art, they're modern in their own sense. So the word modern just then becomes really problematic, and it just, if you look at it, you have to redefine it. Like, one of the general definition is, breaking away from your roots is like modernism. But then you read other scholars like Jacques Attali, and he says, like, no, it's the revisitation of like what you have left behind, but you recontextualize it. So I think it has to do with like how you can redefine a certain terminology, if that's what it is, but you have to understand and give a contextual reference to it, like, the political and social part of it. So I don't know if that just answers your question. That
I don't know if we have time for like question and answer.
Can I elaborate on to what Samina said, that I think modernism, there's a modernistic approach. But when we talk about modernism, it's almost like comes from the canon of art history, that specific period or specific style. But yet, when we look at, when I was looking at this exhibition, I was recalling works seen at different galleries around the world, like in Sri Lanka or Bangladesh, and I think at that period, this was a language of that time. Majority of artists working with that. The reason is that I don't know, fortunately, unfortunately, we did not really arrive at modernism. Modernism arrived at our doorstep. So we are almost like a recipient of whatever happened somewhere else through a certain kind of a progress or process. So we adapted it and we used it, and I think we use it in a very, when we talk about modernism, I think that's also kind of, I agree with you, that's also kind of a misleading in some way, because when we read about these artists written in Urdu, they never used word Jadid Musawwir. They always used Tajridi Musawwir, which is abstract painter, or Nay artist, new artist. So there was never kind of the term of modernism mentioned into it. Is something they are trying to do something new, or they're trying to kind of liberate a recognizable image into something which is more like an abstract thing as well. So I feel that we cannot really, whatever we call them now, probably they were not really referred at that time when they were making these works as well.
But the way we write history, and then when we were talking about the problem of Akbar Naqvi's book, where certain artists are missing, and it is when we say redefine modernism, it is the historian's definition always. And in that, what you are saying makes a lot of sense to me, that it arrived at our doorstep.
for me, we never had a modernism, we always had a postmodernism. Because when you think about, we like, I think, in a very simplistic manner, we talk about as Safdar being modern. He was not a modern, he was a postmodern. Or let's say Laila Shahzada, which we omit. And when we look at her work, or anyone else, Ali Imam, everyone, or Shamsa, or Ahmad Parvez, they were all drawing their sources from tradition of calligraphy. Safdar made a lot of images based on Indus Valley civilization's works. So was Laila Shahzada and her dancing figure and horses as well. So I think modernism for us was not really pure, simple, flat, hard edge painting. There was some kind of a clue. Always there is some kind of clue. Either it's a writing, or either it is something to do with the history, or some kind of a readable. Even I remember, like at your house, that's incredible as Safdar. When I was looking at this pure abstract painting, but I was thinking, oh, this can be a wheat field. So it's always postmodernism. I think we still haven't really arrived at modernism. We arrived at postmodernism, but doesn't matter. It's almost like, I think an artist is not a linear thing. It's like being a railway station, that you take this train or you take this train. You can take all these trains which are taking place at the same time, and I think that's a great thing about art for us.
I think we're
done.
I think we're out of time, but I want to thank all of you on behalf of Faiz Foundation Trust for being here at the festival, and of course to thank Samina for the valuable work that she's done and woken us up to some of the wonderful aspects of our art history, which hopefully will mean much more to many of the people here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.